Calm days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series and beyond. I am your host, Concert Reader Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, he likes his detectives like he likes his eggs. Poached. It's Matt Freeman.
Yep, I get it.
What? How do you like your eggs?
I like my eggs sunny side up, just like Bill Hodges.
No, because it was hard boiled, is what I was going for there.
But Bill Hodges is such a sunny and happy, smiley character.
Not in the TV show, but that's a conversation for another day. Because this week on the show, we are taking one final look at Mr. Mercedes, Stephen King's hard-boiled detective novel. This is the thing we like to do at the end of our long series on these books, take one last holistic view on the book. And so that's what we're going to do today, Matt. I'm pretty excited about it, actually. Me
too. Yeah, this was a great book. And I think there are several points during our discussions week to week where I would be like, I'm going to need to step back from this and look at it holistically. So now we're doing that.
Yeah, and we said at that time that we were going to put pins in those things and remember them all distinctly. And I have to say here today, we definitely did that. For sure.
Yeah, we're really good at that.
Then we do have some mailbag questions that you folks sent into us that we have to read and answer. Got a lot of questions today, some pretty great ones in here, so pretty excited to read and discuss those questions. And then Matt, this is a little bit of appetizer here.
Okay.
At the end of our show, at the end of this week's episode, we have a pretty big announcement to make, I think.
Oh my God.
Well, you know what it is.
I know, but I'm excited.
Okay. Your gasp was just so believable that I was momentarily like, oh, did I tell Matt what the announcement is? And I couldn't remember, but of course I did.
It's a gasp of excitement. I gasp when I'm excited. Leave me alone.
All people do.
Yeah.
So yeah, look forward to that at the very end of the episode. But until then, let's talk about Mr. Mercedes. Matt, it's been a week since we finished the book. It's been a week for you to kind of sit with this thing as a whole. How are you feeling? How are you feeling today as you sit down to think back about your time with Mr. Mercedes? It was, I believe, a month and a week with this book. How are you feeling?
This book, I love this book. It really sucked me in. I think probably my favorite part of the book was the beginning of the book. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy the resolution. I enjoyed the resolution very much. I thought it all came together very well and was very, very well structured. I guess I'll just reiterate a comment that I made earlier, which is like, I think one of the benefits of King writing hardboiled is that he gets to use a fairly well-defined structure and then play within that structure. And so that kind of takes the stress of coming up with a good ending off of his shoulders, because it's like, look, you kind of know the shape of the ending because it's a hardboiled novel. It has to end with a certain structural, mechanistically follow certain structural forms, you could say, in order to remain a hardboiled novel. And he does that. So overall, I think all of that works perfectly. It concludes very nicely. The beginning is probably the part that I remember the most fondly because of how much it grabbed me, and then just like sucked me into the story and sucked me into the characters in particular. I think just final note of my preamble reaction here is, I think the thing that will stay with me about this novel, the memorable thing that I'll walk away with, is the characters. Bill Hodges, Brady, for better or worse, Holly, as a kind of as a question mark, because I know that she ends up being this big part of his career. But Janie, for that matter, even Olivia Trelawney, like some of these side characters, they were very vivid, they were very distinct, and I think he just had a lot. He really flexed his strengths in character writing in this novel, and that's what's going to stay with me.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that I really felt reading this time was just the energy of the book. And I think, if I had to guess where that comes from, is that like King is feeling excited writing in a genre he hasn't gotten a lot of experience writing in before, and as you said, playing with these tropes, playing with this structure of this kind of book. And it's like, it's kind of like a kid in a candy store. It's like, oh, I've never used this before. I've never gotten to do this before. I've never gotten to lean into this before. And I feel the energy and excitement of it. You know, this is a
Mhm.
man who, at this point in his career, you know, this is the 2010s. We're almost up to current time. That has been has been writing for a very long time and written very many things. And it is always kind of incredible to me that the process or the thing never gets stale to him. And I think one of the reasons why it never gets stale is because he allows himself projects like this, like the Bill Hodges trilogy, where he just says, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to dive into this thing head first. And I don't know, I felt that energy. We didn't talk a lot, Matt, about like Bill Hodges as a king metaphor, you know. Like, I mean, we talked about Bill Hodges and we talked about a lot of these characters and how they bang off each other, but like Bill Hodges, the retired detective, like desperately searching for meaning in his life, I think is really interesting as a reflection of Stephen King, maybe thinking about it as he gets older. How am I going to retire? Am I gonna, this is this going to happen? Is there going to be a day where I'm going to say I'm done doing this? And what is my life going to be like? And I mean, I don't know. It's really, really interesting. One other thing I would like to talk to you about that's just occurring to me now is Bill Hodges's understanding of retirement as compared to the Insomnia understanding of what retirement is.
Mhm.
You know, two books about a retired elderly character, but different, very different phases of the author's life as he wrote them.
So interesting that you just said insomnia. This must be our Kef working, because I was just going to make a different reference to insomnia. I was going to say, specifically you were talking about the energy of this novel and how, you know, there's a real sense of momentum to this whole novel. It
Hmm.
really moves at a good pace. A lot happens. Like we would have we'd have whole weeks where we'd be like, damn, a lot happened this week. And it felt like, I think we had some really long episodes of the podcast on this book specifically, because it would be like, well, we have to hit all of these beats and there's so many beats,
Yeah.
because so much happens, you know, per unit page basically. And and I was going to kind of contrast that against insomnia, not to say that stuff doesn't happen in insomnia, but like that's a much more kind of slow paced, kind of almost like meditative, almost
Yeah.
melancholic book. And what's funny to me is, if you quiz me on this, I would fail. But I'll just tell you the fact is that Insomnia was released in 1994, and Mr. Mercedes was obviously released in 2014.
Hmm.
So these are 20 years apart, but you feel like Insomnia was written by an old man, and you feel like Mr. Mercedes was written by a younger man, right? Like I'm not being insulting in saying that. It's because of the characters and kind of who the characters are.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, and I think that connects with, like, in both cases you have a retiree as the main character, but they're like totally different human beings. Um, uh, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't even remember what Ralph Roberts' job was. He didn't. He didn't care about it. Whereas Bill Hodges, he's obsessed. Even when he puts down his cases, he can't really put down his cases. And you imagine that's probably how King feels about his books. Even if he were to retire, he would just kind of putter around the house thinking about the books that were in his head that he didn't get to write, and then probably end up writing them anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Now I'm going insane because I can't remember what Ralph Roberts' job was, and it's driving me insane. Didn't he? I feel like he had a blue collar job, but maybe I'm wrong
Yeah, I
there.
think he had a blue collar job of some kind, but I think it just fundamentally didn't matter to who he was.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that's such a great pull. I completely agree with that. The irony of the older man writing a book with younger energy. And I think, again, I think this is reflected in Bill Hodges, right? Bill Hodges is a character who, when we meet him at the very beginning of the story, he maybe is closer to the Ralph Roberts of Stephen King's Insomnia, where, you know, he is kind of lost, uncertain. Maybe he hears that ticking clock of death because he's gonna maybe cause it to stop ticking himself. um but then he discovers this case and this reason to live again, and he's reborn almost. And part of me wants to put that on Stephen King as well and say, here's a man who's getting up there in years. Not I don't think he was quite as old as Ralph is, when he was writing Mr. Mercedes, but getting up there, thinking about getting old and what life after and working could perhaps be, and maybe uncertain and in a malaise about it. And then he gets an idea to do this kind of book, and it is as invigorating and, you know, powerful
Mhm.
to him as this case was to Bill Hodges. It gives him a new lease on life. It gives him new energy and zeal and desire to get out there and do things. And this is all supposition. I don't know if that's the truth, but like I think it's easy to draw that connection.
I imagine it, I've never, I'm not a practicing novelist, right? But I imagine it's hard not to sort of vibe with the novel you're writing, one way or the
Hmm.
other. Like you spend all
Sure.
day thinking about it, inhabiting it.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. What you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now all I'm thinking about is like his wife being his first reader, reading about this man
Uh huh.
hooking up with a chick 20 years is younger. I'd be like, okay, Steve,
Uh-huh.
okay,
Yeah.
we get it.
Yeah. At this point in their shared life together, she's got to be used to it, though. Like,
No,
okay, my husband is a massive horn dog at all times, and all of his characters are, and yeah, she's just accepted it.
yeah, I mean, and Bill, to circle around to a serious conversation, Bill goes through a pretty big transformation in the course of this novel, right? He
Mhm.
starts off as a suicidal retired cop who ends, you know, with being given a new heart, essentially, right? Like
Mhm.
his heart wasn't in it before, and now he's got a new heart. And I guess we know sort of that he goes on from here, right? That because there are two other novels in the series, but how what are you feeling about Bill by the end of this novel? How do you like how his story here all wrapped up?
That's a good question. I guess I don't want to say I'm dissatisfied because that would imply like I'm unhappy with it or something. But I think it's an intentional note of leaving you a little bit hanging. Like he's because it's not a happy resolution. It's not Bill Hodges doesn't get the keys to the city. He doesn't get his private eye badge. He doesn't get honored for
Yeah.
saving. He gets essentially no credit. The only thing he gets is not thrown in jail for basically doing a lot of things he shouldn't have done. Because in the end he did end up catching the guy and stopping the not just catching the guy, but stopping the guy from blowing up a ton of people. So that's an interesting way of resolving. And I guess it is pretty hard boiled because it's like it would absolutely not feel hard boiled if the resolution were like, and then Bill Hodges gets a parade, right? It's like that's just not, yeah, that doesn't work with the genre, with the tone, with
Yeah.
anything. So I do think there's a kind of bittersweetness, kind of wistful, like, you know, the man lights a cigarette while standing in the rain and stares into the distance, thinking about the one that got away, and then turns his back and walks down the street as the camera pulls back. And that's the end, right? It's not. It's a melancholic ending for a melancholic book where sad things do happen.
Yeah.
I don't know if that quite answered the thrust of the question, but like it did leave me with this feeling of like, oh, that's not quite the like hurrah that I wanted to end with. And then I thought about it more and was like, well, yeah, that wouldn't really fit with this book, I think.
Sure. I do think like it would be fair for you to assume going into this, knowing this is the first book in a trilogy, that we are going to leave this book with him, starting his own private detective firm,
Mhm.
right? Like you can kind of see the lines right there. It's like, oh, of course, this is the natural thing, right? And perhaps that melancholic ending that you're talking about is him sitting in his chair in his new detective's office, but he's alone still, and so like he's got this thing now, he's got this thing to focus on in this life after retirement, but it's a lonely one. But that's not what we do really either, right? We don't give him the the contentment in his career necessarily. I mean, he's going to be working, he's going to be a bail jumper, but I think that the way we give Bill contentment is in his relationships.
Yeah.
Like, yes, he lost Janie and it was very, very sad, but he gained both Holly and Jerome. I mean, he knew Jerome before the events of the book, but I think their relationship is much closer than it was. Like, I go back to the line that we read earlier in the book where it said the one thing Bill and Brady had in common was they didn't really see the need for friendships. Like, they just didn't really have any friends ever. Like, the closest thing I think Bill would call to a friend at the beginning of this book was Pete, and even that we kind of see was not really a friendship, not even really a mutual like respect. It was just kind
Yeah.
of the complicated, sometimes marriage like nature of partnerships. But at the end of this book, he has two friends. He does, like, he has Holly, he has Jerome, and so he has people in his life, and I think that matters.
Yeah, totally agree. Like that, I think I don't think that the next books are going to be like, and then Hodges did get his private eye license, and because I just think I think in line with what we've been talking about this whole time, King is very aware of the tropes of the genre that he's playing in, and it's not that he's avoiding using the tropes, but if he's going to use a trope, he's going to use it in a way that's organic. So I think
Hmm.
my prediction, for what it's worth, we're not going to read these books for the podcast, but just just for posterity, is that he does not like inhabit the official role of Bill Hodges' private eye, but he ends up getting up to a lot of the same shenanigans that he would have if he had been a private eye. Like he keeps getting. My guess is that he keeps getting in situations where something goes wrong or somebody needs help. Um, but perhaps even some of the same exact situations that you would see in your noir novels or shows where somebody's missing. He needs to help find somebody who's missing, and it's like, well, you don't need to be a private eye to poke around and look for somebody who's missing, right? That's you don't need a license to do that, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think you may end up just being a detective without the title, right? I think that's quite plausible. And it's weird to me because I'm like, I think you might have asked a question in previous weeks, like, what if it's nothing like that? What if the Bill Hodges trilogy is nothing to do with him being a detective? I would be surprised if that was the case, but nothing is impossible, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess, like, the reason I'm kind of thinking of this is one of the things I remember, I asked you kind of early in the series was, like, what does happiness look like for Bill in this world? Because, like,
Mhm.
we had these beats about him being lonely, but also dissatisfied and feeling like there's nothing to live for in retirement, and without the job, like, there was nothing there. And then we also kind of talked about, like, okay, well, the Brady gives him the job back again, sort of. And we're like, oh, that's great, but what if that job is over? Like, can you just really just go from job to job, or not? So, I mean, I guess the way that the book ends, we really don't, like, because we don't make him a private detective again, because he doesn't, like, get bonded by the city and becomes a PI, and is not, like, the opening of his shop is the beginning of the book, or the ending of the book rather. We do kind of give him this specific, like, oh, you found a way to be content outside of your job, right? Sort
Mhm.
of, like, because I don't think, I mean, I think being a bail jumper will give him something to do, but it's not like the kind of detective work solving crimes that really motivated him throughout his career. So I don't know, what do you think?
Well, yeah, I so I'm going to take the spirit of your question and maybe phrase it in the way I think about these sorts of things, which is like it's
Please
not.
do. It was not well phrased.
Just like I typically think in terms of like what is the character's flaw rather than specifically like what will make them happy. I'm like, well, what is wrong with them at the beginning of the story? What is keeping them from happiness specifically?
Hmm.
And then how is that dealt with in the story, and is that resolved? And I think, like we kind of said a second ago, he's super lonely. Like that's his main problem, although he doesn't quite realize that, or he doesn't verbalize it that way to himself, because he thinks of himself as somebody who doesn't need friends, doesn't need relationships, just
Hmm.
kind of maybe deserves to be alone. And then over the course of the book, he forms these relationships and reestablishes his sense of himself I think, as someone who does not just, hey, it sure was useful to have Jerome and Holly around, but like he actually relies on these people, needs these people, likes these people, and cares about them. And,
Hmm.
and Janie too. I mean, Janie was a huge part of all this that I want to get to. The reason I'm not mentioning Janie more is that I kind of want to have a whole section to talk about Janie and his relationship with Janie.
Okay.
Um, but anyway, I think that's largely the structure. Is like we set him up with this flaw of being super lonely and not even realizing that he's lonely. Like he's just depressed. Like he thinks like I'm depressed and suicidal because I lost my job because I'm retired, and it's like, well, yeah, okay, but it's actually because you're lonely, and the being retired is kind of upstream of that. Um,
Yeah.
Now
I
he's
mean,
not lonely. Yeah.
essentially, when you make your entire life about your career, as he textually said he did, right?
Mhm.
Then when that part of your life ends, you've got nothing left, and that's where he is. Where yeah, it's not just that the job is over; it's that the job is over, but he lost everything else because of the job,
Mhm.
and now he has nothing. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I like that. And okay, let's talk about Janie though. Let's do it. You want
Yeah.
to
Well,
talk about
so
Janie? Let's talk about Janie.
yeah, the specific thing is just like, we've read literally over 100 books, together and talked about them. I can
Hmm.
think of very few where I was affected by like a tragic romance as much as I was by this book, where I really thought their romance was charming and earnest, and I love both of the characters. Like I think that's a common flaw in books, is that you care about one of the characters in the romantic pairing, but you don't really care. You don't really, one of them is obviously the love interest
Hmm.
for the main character, or you just don't buy it for some other reason, and maybe it's like personal and idiosyncratic to each person. But very often I'm just not moved by romantic stories, even though I like them. I'm not saying I don't like them. I do like them. I'm just very often they don't work on me. But this one did, and I really love Bill Hodges as a character and like felt aligned with him. And then when Janie is introduced, despite the fact that she gets, relatively little space on the page, I think she's very well drawn. Some of King's best, efficient characterization. She felt real. She felt three dimensional. She had her own stuff going on, her own life, and I was really drawn in by this idea. Like they're these two people who they're kind of later in life, and they're both have this attitude of, I'm too old to fall in love. I'm too old to fall. This is just a fling, but like they're actually both super into the other person,
Hmm.
and like being drawn into it against their own, almost their own better judgment. I thought that
Yeah.
that just worked on me like gangbusters. And I really did not want her to die, even though there's a certain point where it's like, okay, I see where this is going. She's dead. And I was like, damn it. Like I was very affected by this. And when she did die and Hodges' reaction to it, I was super affected by. And that's kind of what I wanted to say basically, is I thought Janie was a great character. I thought their romance was very well done by my standards, by my, like, it worked on me. I'll say, like, I think people can have different things that work on them. I'll just say this worked on me
Yeah.
really well. And then her death really affected me as well.
How do you compare it to Sadie? Since you were talking about this romance relationship, we just read another book where romance is a pretty key central figure to it all. It sounds like just from what you've been saying that you might have thought this worked on you more than the Jake and Sadie relationship.
I think the tragedy of this mostly worked better on me than the Jake and Sadie, and I say exactly why. Like, we spent so much time in that previous book talking about how confused and baffled we were by certain certain plot choices, where we would be like, but why didn't, but what but the time travel, and it kept it, for me anyway, totally open to the idea that other people aren't affected this way, but for me it made the whole thing remain at arm's length. Like even the moment when that character dies in that book, I felt at arm's length from it, because I was like, it's a time travel story. It's probably going to get undone, and if it's not undone, we're going to see some other version of Sadie later, and we do, right? So
Uh-huh.
like the very last scene of that book did work on me really well after everything was kind of wrapped up. So like that specific scene worked on me, and Sadie as a character is a great character, but like so I'm not even criticizing really. I'm criticizing to the extent that the time travel stuff kind of made it all muddy for me. Whereas this book
Mhm.
is just very, clean and direct and propulsive and engaging. And it was simpler, and thus it worked on me a lot more directly.
Mhm.
Do you feel this? I mean, are you that is what I'm saying totally, wild to you, or are you do you feel the same way I do at all?
No, I mean, I think I really like the two of them together. I haven't given a lot of thought to like how I would stack it up versus the Sadie Jacob at all, which because I deeply love those two characters and I love their relationship. I mean, I do think the difference in this book and that book is just how King is characterizing Bill. I actually think this is really interesting when you think about it, because I was thinking about this in relation because we're kind of right in the middle of watching the first season of the TV show, which we'll be talking about next week. Um, and because of things that they do in that TV show that we'll get into next week, I was thinking about the Bill's flaws as a human being in this book, and how he doesn't have that many of them actually.
Hmm.
Like he he the biggest struggle of the novel is whether or not Bill is going to go to the cops with this when he should or should not, right? Like
Hmm.
that he's perhaps being a little too blasé with bringing other people into his circle and risking their lives. Um, but that is like kind of small potatoes, and like it just the reason I'm bringing this up is because I just remember all the conversations that we had about Jake, where we're like, Jake, you fucking idiot, what are you doing, why are you
Yeah.
doing this, like, and how frustrating that was, like just to read, and also just like on behalf of Sadie. And this book is not trying to be as complicated as that. As you said, it's a pretty simple, straightforward story. And I think Bill Hodges is just kind of a simple, straightforward guy. He's just good.
Hmm.
Like he this is not really, talking about the deconstruction of a hard-boiled detective story. This is not a guy who is like corrupted by a system or part of a corrupt system, but he's like the anti-hero that we love. He's just a good dude. He's just
Hmm.
a really good dude. And so his relationship with Janie has no complexity to any of it all. It's just like, oh, he loves her, she loves him, they're sweet together. Like, this is great. I feel it. And then so yeah, when that is taken from him, I think that hits pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's funny because I have called him a gunslinger, right? He is a gunslinger in many ways, but it's almost like, well, gunslingers are often very hard people, and
Hmm.
Hodges is a very kind, caring man, actually.
Yeah. I mean, the one little bit of darkness we see from him is when he, tries to work out some of his frustration on some hooligans by slapping them around with his happy slapper. But like that, like, see that in a different book, that is like King establishing something in order to dive into it and really talk about it later, and like get into like, is Brady going to drive him to do something terrible or not? And that's not what this book is at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it, it's just it is. I'm really fascinated by this, and I, like I said, we'll get into this again in the television show when we talk about it next week, because I think the writers of that television show have a very different idea for who Bill Hodges is than Stephen King did in this book. It's not a bad idea. I'm really enjoying preview. I'm really enjoying the show so far, but it's just interesting that
Yeah.
like it really crystallized to me that like, oh wait, there's really no like there's no struggle for the soul of Bill Hodges in this story at all.
You're totally right. A lot of the stuff that we pointed out as like problematic behavior of him breaking all kinds of laws, it's like the book doesn't really seem to take the tack that he is doing anything wrong.
Yeah.
Up into the very end, when we have Holly saying it's like it's only us, it's only you, Bill. You
Hmm.
have to be the one who solves this. The book kind of takes the position that she's just right, and it's not that complicated.
Hmm.
And I do think that's interesting, right? Because you and I, sometimes our instincts are like to look for where the character is acting out some kind of tragic hubris that's going to destroy them.
Hmm.
And often we're right, but then sometimes we're not, because sometimes the character is actually just do, you know, they're acting in ways that might seem crazy, but they're actually doing the right thing. And that's, I think that's what this book is saying basically, is
Yeah.
like sometimes you need a man like this to stand up for the little guy if the system
Hmm.
is going to fail. Like that's another thing that I guess this is one of the things we put a pin in, actually. So I'll put this here,
Oh my
is
God.
is like what are we saying, like sociologically, like like we introduced the beginning of the story with this line of people looking for a job. It's the middle of the economic recession. The economic recession is a huge um, plot point. It's the setting, practically.
Hmm.
The setting of the story is the results of the 2008 financial crisis, um, and this is a world where institutions have failed us, structures have failed us, people are adrift and atomized and alienated from each other and angry. And Bill Hodges exists in this world. He's one of these people. He's also sort of been cast adrift by the system. He retired. It's not like he was fired, right, or laid off or whatever. But he's been released sort of thoughtlessly, just like, okay, you retire. What do you do now? We don't care. We don't care what you do now. Kill yourself for all we care.
Hmm.
Whatever. Society does not care about you. And then so we have a setting in which he has to kind of find his own way. He has to make his own meaning. He has to make his own relationships. And he has to solve this problem that the system won't solve, that society won't solve, because society is dysfunctional now. Society has
Yeah.
collapsed effectively. This is, I think, very early in this conversation, we drew a comparison between like the 2008 collapse and like the economic issues of the 1930s and so forth, when some of these original hard boiled stories come from, where it's like, yeah,
Hmm.
this is sort of a collapsed, fallen world. And so yeah, in that context, yeah, Hodges has got to be the lone gunman. That's the wrong association. I mean yeah, we're just talking about the other book. What I mean is,
Yeah.
like, he's got to be the sheriff. He's got to be the guy who just takes it upon himself to solve the problem, because he can't rely
Hmm.
on society. I think I may have understood it, at least in my own mind. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think you're right. It occurs to me as you were talking that like literally every character in this book is looking for a job, like
Hmm.
every single one. um, in the literal sense or the more metaphorical sense. Like that's
Hmm.
Holly is looking for a purpose. Bill is looking for a purpose. Brady calls these things his jobs that he does. Um, I think that's just kind of true across the board, that everyone is looking for work
Yeah,
in some sense.
I mean, Jerome's relationship with Hodges starts out as a business relationship.
Yeah, yeah. But like as far as like I agree with you. The book is doing this, and the book is playing in this financial crisis as like a way of commenting on the world at large. I guess if I had to say, outside of the setting and the backdrop, like I don't know if King is really trying to like conclude profoundly on anything with this. I think it's just a great backdrop for this type of particular story. I don't know, like it feels more setting than theme to me. I don't, but what do you think?
I I think I agree with that statement in a straightforward way. Like, it feels more setting than themes. Sounds correct, because I don't know what the theme is exactly, I guess. And maybe
Hmm.
I guess that's maybe a oblique criticism, is like, I don't know what the theme is. And uh now that I've said that, maybe we can, perhaps as we go through the discussion questions, I can kick that around in the back of my head.
Yeah,
Maybe we can circle back around to it.
sure. We can tinker. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like it's a very good book about these very specific people. that I enjoy very much. But yeah, trying to attach some sort of larger significance on it. Yeah, I mean, you're so right. Like, is this a book about? Is it a book about how the system has failed? That the system doesn't work anymore. That, like, I mean, that happens. That's true within the book. But like, is that what it's specifically about? I don't really think
Hmm.
so. Like,
Yeah.
I go back to the way we kind of removed the cops from the playing the chessboard at the end of the thing, which
Hmm.
is just like, oh, some big case broke. And like, I guess you could argue that the reason the big case broke is like dumb luck. Like, in everything we see the cops do in this book, I guess, is essentially dumb luck, right? Like they discover Davis is the turnpike killer, not because of any great detective work, but because he walks in the front door and tells them. They stumble upon this alcohol, tobacco, and firearms heist from just happened to being there
Hmm.
type of, like, it's not like great detective work. It's just like, oh, two beat cops just happened to be there and saw a bazooka and said, hey, wait a minute, you can't have that. So I guess you could say, like, we're largely drawing a picture of not incompetence, but like, that there are things that our system just cannot do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like you could step back from this and draw a through line for the whole, like the role of Brady Hartsfield. I think is interesting because he's not drawn as like hyper competent, but he's not drawn as a complete doofus either.
Yeah.
He's sort of like a bright kid who actually does screw up a lot of things and makes a lot of mistakes, but the point is none of his mistakes are bad enough that he gets caught. And it's like what we so stepping back and holistically looking at everything, that's the word of the day, holistically, is like he commits a bunch of car burglaries using uh his thing one of his things thing one
Thing
or
two.
thing two, using thing two, um and doesn't get caught for that. And then he steals the Mercedes and plows it into a bunch of people. Doesn't get caught for that. I guess years later, I mean, like quite a bit of time passes, right, after the Mercedes massacre before Hodges retires, right? I forget the exact
I
amount of
think
time.
it's a year and a
Yeah.
half.
uh,
It's not a huge amount
oh,
of time, but
okay.
it's not quick
Yeah.
either.
Okay. Let's call it a year because I don't remember. And no progress is made on that, and it's only because he gets impatient and he starts bugging Hodges that anything happens, that that Hodges clues into it, because otherwise he would have just gotten away. And then he decides he wants to blow up this concert, and he would have totally gotten away with that too if it
Mhm.
hadn't been for, so like every step of the way he's doing things that the cops are failing to catch him for, because and it's like, why? It's like, because again, he's not super competent and he is making mistakes. And it's like, well, is it that they're under resourced, they have too many cases? I mean, that's implied. I think that's stated in a few places, is like they just have so many cases, can't solve everything.
Yeah.
um
But I do think it's also partially just kind of, I think there is a large critique on society's decision to, like, how we judge people, how we look at people. I do think this is like where Jerome kind of fits in with everything, and Olivia Trelawney, and how we decided who she was and what she was and wasn't capable of, and we kind of wrote her off and didn't care.
mhm,
um and that seems to be a through line through a lot of this book. I mean, it's similar, like that. Basically, that's what they do with Bill. Is like, thanks, you've given us what we need, now we don't really give a shit about you anymore, thanks,
mhm,
goodbye. um
mhm,
so I think there's definitely stuff there as well. So this is like overall critique. Like, I think one kind of common theme you see in the 2010s and the 2020s in King is he is generally like frustrated. I wouldn't call it like angry old man level, but like, you can definitely tell reading these novels, the closer we get to present day especially, how like mad King is about the state of the world, like
mhm.
how pissed off he is about it. um and I do think, like, we see we see that peppered through everything, and I think that's absolutely true here. It's like it's not just, we didn't just set it in the 2008 financial collapse because it would have been, it's this really fun idea to link back to the original hard boiled stories of the 1930s. We did it because also King's like really pissed off about it,
Mhm.
and he's not happy with how things are going.
Yeah.
So to say that there's no meaning behind any of this, I think is false, because obviously there is. It's just, I think, not the driving force of the narrative, I guess.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, I'm reminded of the fact that he was originally inspired to write this novel due to hearing about a news story of a woman who drove her car into a McDonald's,
Yeah.
and then apparently, I think while writing it, or maybe, um, yeah, I think while writing it, the Boston Marathon bombing happened,
Mm-hmm.
and like these things, I think, were working on his mind, where he's just thinking about these random senseless acts of violence that really seem like things that would happen in Derry. It's just like horrible senseless shit that it just makes you depressed about the world and about humanity, and then obviously that stuff affects him. That's why he keeps coming back to it. That's why he writes about it. And yeah, I think that's part of this picture he's painting of this world that's just full of, it's just kind of a decaying world. Like I
Yeah.
think, unfortunately, I think this kind of is his worldview. I don't want to project. I don't like to project, but I feel like there is I guess I'm just riffing on what you just said, where it's like, as he's gotten older, just lived longer in this world, he has felt more and more like this is a world that's moving on and disintegrating and falling apart, and the center is not holding, and so
Mm-hmm.
forth. And maybe he's trying to express some of that in this novel.
Yeah, that could be. I like that. So before we move on to our mailbag, though, we have to talk about Holly. We have to talk about the Holly of it all one last time. Holly
Okay.
Gibney, of course, a huge, huge character in from this book on, basically. And almost, it feels like almost every other book he's written has been a Holly book in some way, shape, or form. And so we talked about Holly a lot throughout the story. I did want to just give us an opportunity here at the end, kind of looking back on everything, to think about Holly one last time. So do you have any parting thoughts about Holly Gibney and her role in both this book and then kind of largely in King's mind?
Well, not really. I think I more am interested in your take on Holly as like, what if Carrie White didn't have superpowers and didn't die as a teenager? Because that's the kind of character she is. That's the archetype, is like somebody who was bullied and alienated and a misfit as a kid, and didn't just like grow out of it. She's still a misfit as an
Mm-hmm.
adult. And like, and what is that like? What does that person become? And can, maybe implicitly, can that person be a gunslinger despite all of that? I'm gonna draw, but maybe a weird comparison, but um, Susanna, Odetta, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
as a character who has a disability, but who is more than capable of being a gunslinger. And uh, I think that's an idea that King is interested in. This feels very different. Like, I think Susanna and Holly, at least based on this book, they seem nothing alike. They seem about as far apart as two women can be.
Yeah.
But they do. I think the connecting line there is like, you've been given every disadvantage, and yet we're still going to watch them rise to the challenge, and that's incredibly inspiring and dramatic. Um, but I feel like I don't have much to go on, so I kind of want to hear more from you, honestly. Like, and it's hard for you, I understand, because you got to say things without spoiling the whole rest of the whole rest of King's
Yeah.
works. But like, you seem to have something in mind that I wish you could just say it. I know you can't. I know you can't just say it. I know that, but like, I kind of do want to give you an opportunity to say your piece here.
Yeah, I mean, I really kind of, fell in love with my interpretation from last week, which is I was struggling to say that sentence because it felt like a disgusting sentence as I was saying it. But I really just love her as this. Like I am incredibly fascinated by this character, and something you might not know is that amongst a lot of readers, she can be pretty divisive. Like there are people that are fairly frustrated with King's insistence on returning to this character over and over and over again. And part of me gets that because kind of the way the character is drawn, especially in this book, is she's kind of annoying at times, right? Like it's actually pretty remarkable how lovable and wonderful she ends up being in this book, considering that the first time we meet her, we are basically inundated with all these descriptions about how weird she is and how uncomfortable she is, and like how, Bill doesn't really know what to make of her and kind of immediately dismisses her offhand, and she seems like so does everyone else, and so does the narrative of the book, because like I think it's really fascinating. We have this woman who orders a hamburger and she's so stuttery and quiet that we can't even hear what she says, and Bill and Janie make a joke about that. And then like a couple chapters later, we see her open her mouth for the first time and she's just like talking like a human being. Like she's
Uh-huh.
just like, "Oh, this was always there. Just no one ever saw it and no one ever gave her the opportunity."
Hmm.
Um so like all that being said, it makes sense to me that there's some people who find her off-putting and weird. I am fascinated by her as this kind of full circle exploration of Stephen King taking a character and just there is like always unanswered questions with Holly, right? There's always something that the book leaves you with, and this is, as you said, I'm not speaking in specifics here for the books going forward, but like this book in particular, like she's doing okay at the end of the book, she's doing better, she's off on her own for the first time, but like then the question is like, well, how long can, like, what happens if there's a problem, like what, how is that going to work? What does she do now? How does she find her place in the world? How does she become a gunslinger, as you said? Like what is going to happen when she tries to take on that mantle? There's so much unanswered there with this character, and that ultimately, outside of the Carrie White metaphor, outside of anything else, is I think why King keeps returning to her, because it's just like there's just something more there. And I know I said this multiple times during the course of the book, but it really was fascinating looking at her from this perspective and being like, I kind of get it now. Like, I get why he was just he felt completely in love with this character the second she showed up on the page.
Hmm.
And just like there's something about her that just like you just fall in love with her. Like you really do. Like just the way he writes her, and you can tell that he's falling in love with her as a character as well as he's writing her, and that like that, we talked about the energy of the book at the beginning of the episode, but that is part of the energy, is just like he's so into Holly, and it does almost become a tale of two books, like everything before Holly shows up and everything after. um
Yeah.
and I don't have the full answers for this yet,
Hmm.
but it's really really interesting to me that like she is this kind of, I'm trying to think of the word, but she draws energy and interest to her in this very specific kind of way.
Yeah. I mean, so what I'm about to say feels a little reductive, even as I'm forming the thought. But like, the more disadvantaged you make your character, the more thrilling it is to watch them succeed. It's just kind of the normal rule of storytelling.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think like that, like that's one function that Holly serves. But I don't think that's all there is to it. Like it's just the execution, I guess. Like
Yeah.
it is what I just said, but it's executed remarkably well and uh, vividly. Like she feels alive, like most of the characters in this book, really. So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I still feel like there's something left to be said. I feel like you and I kind of batted this idea back and forth here, and I feel like we have felt around the edges of the thing, but I don't know that I feel like we've nailed it yet.
Yeah.
And I personally don't expect to be able to because I haven't read a tenth of the Holly content that exists. Um, but um, but it's an interesting thought, and perhaps later when I read more of these books in my own time, I will figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I look forward to having that conversation.
All right.
All right, Matt. Let's move on to our mailbag now. We have a lot of questions, some about Mr. Mercedes, some about Stephen King in general, and some about us.
All right.
So let's. I've tried to organize these a little bit here. I don't always do a good job, but hopefully these are relatively well organized. So let's just jump into the first one.
All right. Ozma Weezerman. Ozma Weezerman. Am I Ron Burgundying that, Scott?
I think that's fine.
Okay. They say, love this trilogy and thought it was kind of cool how King actually stepped away from some of his usual Kingisms for the series. The guy the guys kind of touched on it with the generic crap TV shows Bill was watching at the start of the book, but he actually kept this up in other ways. King is known for dropping proper nouns all over the place. Plymouth cars, Coca-Cola, band names, and everything in between. In this one, you don't even know what city or state the book takes place in. Again, nameless TV shows instead of Jerry Springer or whatever. He even makes up a name for the chicken place instead of KFC. I'm assuming it was done just to show you this kind of evil can take place in your town and doesn't need to be a real place. But are there thoughts from anyone else as to why he does this?
This is a really fun question, Matt. We kind of talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the book when we did talk about the non Jerry Springer. I like that. I like that Ozma pointed out it wasn't KFC. I think there is one huge exception to this though, and that's of course Mercedes.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
The Mercedes and Mr. Mercedes is specific, and that's like the focal point of the story. So maybe that's part of the reason why, right? Maybe we went generic with everything. So the one time we use something specific and branded, it has all the more impact.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Like, and there's specific associations with Mercedes where if it had been a Takuro Spirit, it would have meant nothing. Would have literally meant nothing to you. Whereas Mercedes, it's like, yeah, it's the rich person car, and then everything else, yeah, like you said, it is that is kind of funny that the whole story hinges on one brand name and then he avoids it. For the rest, so to be honest, I didn't even like consciously notice that he never says what city this is. Like I just kind of visualized it as a melange of like Chicago and Boston and Detroit and cities where stories like this happen, I'd never thought about the fact that we never actually say what city it is.
Yeah, I only realized that when I was like working on my notes and trying to like just say this story takes place in I'm pretty sure it's in Ohio. But I don't know if we ever get like an actual city name. So yeah,
it's in the tri-state area.
So I will say, like, and this might be like the most boring possible answer to this question, is that like when King was up and coming, I think companies were a lot less litigious about brand name usage in stories. And I think they're becoming more and more litigious about that kind of stuff. And so some of this might literally just be the most boring thing possible, which is that like Jerry Springer show said, absolutely not, you can't. But that's not the thing we operate under, right? We don't operate under those assumptions. So it wasn't that way. It was for a reason, and it does something for the story. But that might be the boring answer.
That's pretty interesting. Maybe you could be right. I don't know. I kind of want to look into that now. See if you wrote American Psycho these days, would you be sued for,
I mean, either sued or just like you would ask permission beforehand to avoid being sued and are told absolutely not. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting.
I would need to look at like a recent, maybe when we're reading Fairy Tale in a few weeks, we can like pay attention to this because that's very, very recent. Because I haven't actually paid attention to like how often does King still get to put these brand names in his stories?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, cool. Apocalypse Wind says, throughout this novel, I couldn't help but feel King has a tenuous grasp on how post-2010 technology works. From Jerome and Holly looking deep into Brady's hard drive to everyone's cell phone blanking out during the concert, it all seemed like my grandpa asking for help setting up a smart TV, but not wanting to admit he has no idea how any of it works. Is this an aspect of modern-day King that bothers you, or is it just another example of his quaint golly gee folkiness that works in spite of itself? Um, it doesn't bother me. I think he's an old man and he understands things to a certain extent and he gets research for other stuff, but like even if you're writing off of research, you really don't have like a perfect grasp of it, right?
Yeah, I don't think it bothers me either. It is interesting to think like, are we condemned to only ever tell fiction about the period of our life where we were just like totally with it and understood everything that was going on? Because there's going to be, and you know, there's stuff you just don't know about, right? I guess and this doesn't bother me, but I guess it's just kind of interesting that occasionally he will write stories that kind of rely on the characters understanding computers,
Mm-hmm.
and he clearly doesn't. Like, just honestly does not. And so it's like, well, then why have this be a plot point? Like, why don't we just avoid this? And I think
Yeah.
the answer is like he just wanted to. He wanted there to be like this tension between the old man character who doesn't understand technology and the young whiz kid who does, and like that's a fun narrative dynamic. And like that, honestly, none of the stuff really bothered me with like because it was all like, yeah, well, Brady's a weirdo. Like he might have done things in an unusual way anyway. Like the fact that he uses this Debbie's Blue Umbrella site,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, sure, that's fine. It's because he's Brady. It's
Yeah.
um
I mean, I think the ultimate answer to this question is he's never going to let technology get in the way of a good story. Like
yeah, yeah,
the acknowledgments section of this novel states outright that he is fully aware that a Mercedes-Benz has the technology to stop exactly what Brady does to get into the car, and like would have at the time of this book is set. Like he says that outright, so like
yeah.
he knows. It's just who cares? Like I think that is his philosophy on this. Is I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, right. I mean, to me, I like this is literally the same thing as like totally letting it ruin a book when like it was established that the hyperdrive could only get you 6 parsecs, but then in this scene it gets them 8 parsecs, and that's just not acceptable, and this book is trash. It's like, no, that you're ruining a book for yourself for no reason.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's the magic system of the world. Computers are the magic system of the real world, and if you let it ruin things for you, it's your own fault.
Yeah, I mean, I think to Apocalypse Wind's point, like he definitely does have like he phrases things in such a way that no one would ever phrase them. Like looking deep into Brady's hard drive, I think is perfect. Like that's
Yeah,
um, but I do also think like there's a lot of people that have a lot of complaints about how King writes children in modern times because he still writes them like they're children that grew up in the 1950s. Um, this is another thing I want to pay close attention to in Fairy Tale because I know it has a young person as a pretty central character, but it's never bothered me. Like I notice it and I kind of chuckle at it at times. Is like there's no way a kid born in 2001 would say that phrase ever. But like it never like breaks the novel for me. It's just like, ha, oh, that's silly, Steven. People don't talk like that. And
mm-hmm.
I just kind of move on. So I guess a long answer to a pretty simple question is it still works for me.
Yeah. I just kind of roll with it personally. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Steve Living Room says, will you both immediately or eventually read/reread the rest of the Hodges trilogy and the Holly other Holly books? The reason I ask is I didn't like the last 2 Hodges books on my first read through as much as most King books, but re-listening this time I really liked them. I think one part is reading them all together. More importantly, it seems like each reread of King's book is better than the last. What do you both think?
You want to go first?
I generally like rereading books in generally. So, but I haven't reread that many King books.
Mhm.
because we haven't had time.
Yeah.
There hasn't really been a lot of free time since we started this project for me to go back and revisit one of the ones that we've read. So I can't speak to that specific aspect. And I've only read the first Hodges book, so I can't speak to that either.
Do you feel a strong desire to read the next two books in the series at least?
I do. I do. I want to read more about Bill. I want to find out what's next for Bill. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. For my part of this, I reread all these books pretty recently. So I probably am not going to jump right into Finders Keepers again. Um, that being said, I do agree generally that like rereading books makes me like them more. I think a lot of times, and this is not always true, but a lot of times the reason why you leave a book feeling dissatisfied or disappointed is all about expectations. You thought it was going to be X, it ended up being Y, and that disappointed you. And so the thing about rereading is you go in with completely correct expectations. You know exactly what the story is going to be, and it allows you to perhaps appreciate it on a level you couldn't the first time around. So yeah, rereading, rewatching. I think these are great things that I wish I had more time to do. I mean, I just read Holly not too long ago and enjoyed it. So I can't see myself revisiting these like super soon, but I'm sure I will eventually.
Really like what you just said. Like, yeah, you when you reread something, you can appreciate it for what it's doing rather than judging it against some fantasy of what you had in
Yeah.
your head beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this actually perfectly ties into the next question, by the way, because Electrical Hummus asks, without giving anything away from Matt, who is probably listening to Finders Keepers as I type this up, not quite, not
Not
quite,
quite.
not yet. What do you think of the rest of the Bill Hodges trilogy? Um, so yeah, so I think Mr. Mercedes is the best book in the trilogy. I think it's just the best novel overall. But I think going back to Steve's question, um, the thing about Finders Keepers for me, which is the second book in the series, is that it's very much a book that for a lot of the beginning of it, you're kind of like, what's going on here? What are we do? What are we doing? And why are we doing it this way? And I'm trying to be very vague here, Matt. um, and it's the type of thing where I do think on a reread, I'd probably appreciate that one much more because I know exactly what it's doing and why it's doing it. I think it's
Mm.
a good book. I just think I was a little confused and surprised by where it started and how long it takes to get where it's going. I do think End of Watch is my least favorite in the series, although I believe our friend Kim C like has very, very good things to say about all these books. So I'm really anxious to see what she has to say about all of them. But I think this is so hard to answer without spoiling anything. I think End of Watch does some stuff and brings some stuff to the series that I probably thought just didn't need to be included in this particular series. And so the decision to do that kind of disappointed me. But like we get the characters are like Mr. Mercedes are all very, very good. It's very fun to hang out with them again, and ultimately I enjoyed the series as a whole. But I just do think Mr. Mercedes is just the best one.
Awesome. Cool. I accept your judgment.
I hope I was vague enough to where I didn't give you any specific information, although you could probably just like rack your brain trying to figure out what any of that just meant.
No, I totally tuned out. I was thinking about insomnia. um,
Touche.
all right. Darian Tyros says, with King's various Dark Tower related tweets lately, I know we're all thinking about a new book relating to our favorite linchpin of all worlds. So the question is, if we're going to get a new Dark Tower book, what would be each of your ideal new Dark Tower story? Just a synopsis of what you'd hope to see in the book.
I like this question because yeah, Stephen King's really fucking with people over on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, Stephen King has been just talking about the tower in these real vague ways for the last couple of weeks. And like, okay, so the thing we need to level set here, folks, is that Stephen King's Twitter persona is that of a troll.
Uh-huh.
Like that's what he does on Twitter. He either is fucking with people, telling intentionally terrible jokes, or really trying to make Republicans mad. Like that's what he does on Twitter,
Yeah.
and the occasional like recommending a novel or a movie he's seen. But basically, outside of those things, he's really just trying to fuck with people. So like, I would suggest we all take all these tweets with a very large grain of salt, and not get our hopes up for anything, because the simplest possible, most boring answer to this question is, um, Mike Flanagan is working on his Dark Tower stuff and perhaps asking questions, or he's perhaps got pages from a script that he's reading, and it's reason the tower's on the brain, and that could be all it is.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. Okay, just to answer the question though, I don't have a why not Wishcast, right? Like, it doesn't hurt anything.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a synopsis, but I have like a direction, which would be something like old midworld, kind of something with gunslingers, something kind of a throwback, not necessarily something where we have characters from the real world crossing over into midworld, just a good old fashioned midworld story. Another thing I've always been curious about is like the old ones, but I think I stand by previous statements along the lines that actually works better as mysterious, unexplained lore than it works as narrative. So I think I'll stick with my first answer of just like bandits and outlaws and gunslingers and bad guys in black hats and good guys in white hats, with a little bit of supernatural slow zombies and robots thrown in there for flavor.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that everyone kind of wants, and I myself kind of want, is to see what happens to Roland on his next loop. But that is, I think, the exact wrong thing, and I hope that never ever happens. I don't want it. I don't want to know. The idea that the millions of different myriad possibilities that all exist in all of our heads simultaneously for what happens as Roland walks through that door and across that desert again are better than any possible reality could be there. That's part of the brilliance of the ending, and anything that we carry on from there would, in my opinion, lessen the ending a little bit. So I think that's wrong. I also think hanging out with our quartet as much as we want to is probably the wrong move. I don't think I would want to see more with Roland. I think we left Eddie and Jake and Susanna behind in ways that I want that to be done with them. I want their time in the story to be done. So I think I'm going to kind of air with you here that seeing more of Midworld of the past would be interesting. There's a lot of talk right now. There's like, I think an anthology series that's coming out either this year or next year that's like stories within Stephen King's The Stand universe. Just has a bunch of different authors like writing short stories that exist in the universe of The Stand. And I'm like, that would be like a fun Dark Tower thing, right? Like, let's just write some short stories, just like an anthology series of Midworld stories. Would be really cool.
Yeah, there's so many possibilities, right? Another thing I think, like, I'm not saying I want this specifically, but like, you could imagine an interesting story about Stephen Deschain's quartet. Just there's your prompt. Give me a story about Stephen Deschain's quartet, right? Like, it writes itself. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff there. Yeah.
There's I mean, the world is cool. I want to be careful here, because like I would want it to flesh out the world in interesting ways and explore the corners of it without, like, as you said, taking away the coolness of the unknown of some of those corners. Like, you explore every nook and cranny, the world loses a little bit of magic. So I don't want to do that. But I do think there's stories to tell here.
Yeah.
So I it's kind of half answering the question because I offered no specific synopsis, but I answered it.
Yeah, you just agreed with my synopsis. So
yes, there we go. Yeah. All right. Next we have E-Man 9001, who says he's got a two-parter for us. The first question: With King's Dark Tower tweets, people are talking about this a lot. I'm hearing a lot of people say they hope Holly shows up in the new Tower book. I have to say, for me, this is a lot less mixing peanut butter and chocolate and a lot more mixing peanut butter and onions. That is to say, I get immediately concerned when I think about Roland and Holly interacting. I think about how Roland would make Holly feel and immediately get bummed out at how mad I would end up being at Roland. How do you guys imagine an interaction between these two characters going? And it is something you would actually look forward to seeing. Um, I think we kind of sort of answered that already with no. I think we need to be done with Roland now. I love Roland. One of my favorite characters in fiction
Yeah,
of
so
all time.
yeah,
I don't want anyone to write about Roland anymore.
I agree with that entirely. But I mean, I also think, just for the thought experiment of it, that Roland's whole deal is that he's incredibly perceptive and actually a good judge of character. Like one of his, he has many flaws, but one of them is not failing to notice when people have steel in them.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost feel like if that was gonna be a scene where the two of them interact, it would be a scene where he immediately, like almost despite appearances, realizes that this is a person that he can use, which is how he would see it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think there would be a lot of frustration and anger with those two characters for sure. Um, but yeah, I think ultimately, I think you hit the nail on the head there as to how that would go.
Because like Eddie and Odetta slash Detta, when he encounters them, that's why I use those names. Like when he encounters these characters, they're huge pains in his ass, right?
Oh yeah.
But like but he recognizes something valuable in them regardless. So that's why I say that.
No, you're right. You're right. Their second question was: you both made passing references to playing D&D in the past. Do you guys play D&D or any other tabletop RPGs now? Is there any chance we'll ever see a game of Doofs and Dragons? It's a good name.
Yeah, this is a good name.
Um,
So maybe
no.
this questioner knows this, maybe not, but we did do a Weaver Dice campaign a long time
You have
ago.
to explain what that is.
Yeah, I mean, Weaver Dice is a tabletop role playing game created based on the Parahumans universe, which is the universe in which the Worm and Ward web serials take place, which was the show we did before Kingslingers. So we read the Worm and Ward stories, and then we played the Worm Ward Parahumans TTRPG.
Mhm.
And I was the DM for that, and it almost broke me. It was so much work. And my personal problem is that I cared so much about it that it stressed. It was a huge source of stress because I wanted it to go well. And everybody says I did a great job, and I appreciate the compliments, but I can't keep doing that. So, so all this to say, being a DM is really hard. I experienced that, so there's no way that I'm going to do that again in a consistent way.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're up for it, Scott.
I don't think so. I mean, you did do an excellent job. I mean, literally, I think we just got a comment on one of those videos like a week ago or so. Someone found and was watching them and was like, "These are really great. I'm sad you don't do it anymore." And there was like a half minute of where I was like, "Yeah," which is what literally has always happened ever since we stopped doing it. Was like someone will say something nice about it, and then it'll cause me to go back and listen to it, and I'll be like, "Yeah, no, this is really good actually." But it was very, very difficult. It was very tough for Matt to do. It was also very tough for the four of us to get our schedules to line up in a way that we could do it consistently. It was very hard. So I don't see us doing any kind of for content version of D&D anytime soon. And I'm not playing any. Are you playing any tabletop RPGs right now? I'm not.
No, I when I visited our friend Michael the other day, I played a session of God, what's it called? Mouse Guard. But I don't think that counts. That was 1 hour of playing I enjoy it, but it's like
It counts.
Yeah, this isn't me criticizing. Like I've always enjoyed these games. They're like very time consuming. I guess my problem is that like I get too into it. Actually, I don't know if you can tell from like my personality, but like I get into things and I get too into it, and it becomes like a huge distraction from everything else in my life. And so it's not that I don't like these. It's not that I don't like TTRPGs. It's that they work on me too well, and so
Mhm.
I can't afford to get into them. Um,
Yeah, it's just really tough to have time. It's just really tough to carve out time
yeah,
for a thing that requires multiple people to meet at probably a set time every week or every other
yeah,
week or something. That's with my life right now. It's very hard.
yeah. But thanks for the question, and
Yeah.
check out the Weaver Dice episodes if you are interested in something vaguely related to your question.
I would say you need no specific knowledge of parahumans outside of their superpowers,
Yeah,
right? I think that's
correct.
true.
Yeah, there's no I think it's all self-explanatory and
Yeah.
self-contained. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It was fun. I
Cool.
got to play a dumb jock who farted.
I love your character so much. All right. Aqua Lungfish says, maybe a strange question, I don't know, but after having read so much of his stuff, would you classify King as a horror writer? For clarification, I consider someone like Clive Barker to be unequivocally a horror author. This is mainly because I feel the situations drive the story in his works. A man builds a temple to violence and excess in order to meet the devil. Two towns create giant avatars made out of all the citizens tied together in order to fight Hellraiser in general. And those situations are unique and often terrible. But for King, the characters are more important than the situation. He's very good at putting well realized characters in horrific situations, but I don't know if that's the same thing. A lot of the situations he comes up with are pretty basic, which is not to say bad, but often a simple premise allows for more focus on other aspects of the story. What do you guys think? I go back and forth. Um, yeah, I don't think he's a horror writer. I think
Easy.
I think he's a I think he's a writer who's. I think you're just. I think you're just correct. I think he's a writer who's very, very focused on character, often at the expense of plot, and that's not a criticism. That's just what he does.
Yeah.
And he puts people in extreme situations to see what they do, because that's interesting and dramatic, and that can map
Yeah.
onto horror because an extreme situation can be a horrific situation, but it doesn't have to be. And things play out, and sometimes they play out in a way that looks horrific. But again, there's so
Yeah.
many of his novels that they're just not horror. So yeah, I just think you're right.
Yeah. I don't think he's a horror writer. I think he's a writer who likes horror,
Yeah.
which doesn't feel like it's a big distinction, but I think it is. I
Hmm.
think he writes in the horror genre because he really likes horror stories. But it is ultimately not his defining characteristic as an author.
Yeah, I feel like so many of the stories we've read have not been. I mean, obviously some are. Doom McKee is horror,
Mhm.
but Bill
I would
Hodges
say
is not.
more of the 70 something novels, more of his novels are technically horror novels than not. Um,
Hmm.
but I think to Aqua Lungfish's point, like even the stories that are indeed operating in the genre, he approaches them differently, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, like I think it is sort of his most memorable novel, right? And it's like it's horror, but
Hmm.
it's non-standard. It doesn't feel like any other horror that I've read.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just scrolling through the list of novels that we've covered, and I'm not going to do a count. I'm not going to do a tally right now, but I mean, it feels like maybe as many as half of these are not what I would call horror. And I mean, if you include the Dark Tower, like the Dark Tower is just such a weird duck.
Hmm.
I don't know what to call that. So
I mean, there's horror in it, but yeah,
yeah,
I would not classify any of them as horror novels.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right. DJ Nadelko says, do either of you think the King has any plans to release anything posthumously? 76 isn't crazy old, and he still loves writing and has things to say, given the fact that he keeps pumping out more books each year. So I'm not saying this is imminent, but it's a fun thought I had a while ago. If the answer is no, what would you think is something he would release in this situation? Um, well, so I think he has probably absolutely had this conversation with his wife and his estate lawyers and everything. What do you think? I mean, I think I am almost 100% certain that there will be things published posthumously for Stephen King. Now, the question is, did he like does he have things like set aside to be released in the event of my death? Or is it just a conversation to his wife and children that's just like, hey man, when I'm dead and you want to make some money, just do whatever you want with any of this stuff. Go for it. I don't care.
Yeah, right. I think it's very hard to avoid a Brian Herbert / Christopher Tolkien situation,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, look, not exploiting this gold mine would be kind of foolish on a personal level, and so that's just going to happen. And
Uh-huh.
you can't blame a person for doing that, or a family, or an estate, or however you want to look at it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, I mean, he's doubtless got a bunch of unpublished novels. He probably, one interesting thought that occurs to me is that he might have some novels that are kind of in the Richard Bachman space, where it's like he wrote it and then he's like, do I really want to do this? Or maybe his publisher is like, no, thank you though. We can't publish this because we don't want to start riots or whatever. Possible, right? I feel like if that did exist, he would have published it, right? But it's a thought. It's a thought that there are things that he's written that he didn't publish
Yeah.
because they're too extreme in some way, and those might see
One
the light of day.
one thing that I do think is interesting thinking about this question, I don't know if I think Stephen King is that concerned with like his legacy
Hmm.
to the point of like, I mean, obviously like he has some books that he doesn't think are good enough to be published. Like I think that is absolutely true. He's got some trunk novels sitting there that are never going to see the light of day, or not in his lifetime will see the light of day. But like I do think King is a very pragmatic person
Hmm.
and he's just, I don't think overall concerned with the idea that like, oh, but no, if this book is published and everyone hates it, that will ruin how people think of me. um I don't think so. I don't think that would happen, and I think he knows that he's written enough books to where like I mean, he wrote Cell, so like
Yeah.
one stinker is not going to ruin his legacy. um but also I just don't think he cares about that very much.
Yeah,
So
I think he has kind of a lighthearted sense that he's, I don't know if he uses this word in his mind, but maybe he thinks of himself as an entertainer who,
mhm.
um, he's dabbled in screenplays and made
Yeah.
movies, and he's, I think the novel is sort of his home and where he's most comfortable and probably where he has the most fun. But I don't think he restricts himself, and I don't think he has like a firm sense of what his legacy needs to be. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. Cool. Good question though. I to reiterate, I like, we're gonna see some posthumous released King
Yeah.
novels or short story. Like it's for sure, for sure.
Yeah, if for no other reason that the money would probably result in building a bunch of more libraries,
Yeah,
and like, because that's the way he seems to think about money.
yeah. I
um,
could definitely see him making an agreement with his legal team that like, yeah, I mean, really, once I'm dead, release anything you want, but the money has to go here, here, here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. All right. Bliss Orb says, Matt, what are your expectations for Fairy Tale? This is my first time reading this story too. P.S. Um, P.S. The Spotify thing is comments that should be appearing on previous podcasts. I don't know if you'd be interested in looking into that or not. Um, yeah, I
Oh,
have
weird.
not spent any time looking at the Spotify since we last talked
No.
about this, but
Mm-mm.
it's a good point. Fairy Tale. I expect it to be, and I know nothing about this. This is other than maybe reading like a Dust Jacket type synopsis. No, I don't think I have read a Dust Jacket type synopsis. I think I might have read like a press release type synopsis where it's just like I think it's one of these stories where it's like a young someone from our world goes to Midworld, but I don't even know if that's correct. I
I
literally don't know anything.
Yeah, and just for those of you, because this question was specifically um geared towards you, but in case people have forgot, I also have not read Fairy Tale. So this final book, it's our last book of the series, and we're gonna do it a little differently this time, in that neither of us have read the book, so it's both of us going in cold. I'm not gonna be able to lead you anywhere. We're just gonna kind of figure this out as we go. And I have also remained pretty ignorant of what the story is. I know it. There's a young man in it.
Okay.
I believe there's a dog in it.
Okay.
And yeah, they cross a threshold to somewhere. That's basically all I know.
I think fully 50% of my knowledge of this book comes from the cover. And it's like,
which is like a well.
Yeah, that looks like the
like
Crimson King eye.
Yeah. So I mean, we know nothing. So I know that it's like the opinions of it are fairly mixed. There are people that seem to really, really like it, but there are also people that do not like it at all. So it's I know there's some people that are upset that it's going to be our last book because they didn't care for it, but I am excited, because I've never read it and I never got to do it this way with you before. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. Alex E says, I love the show and everything you guys have done. I'm very excited for this potential announcement coming up. I read that part just to remind people that we're getting closer and closer to that announcement at the end of this episode. But Alex's question is, where do you do your reading? I know Matt does audiobook, which makes location pretty fluid, but does Scott have a go-to spot to read for the podcast? Is it different than when you would read for personal entertainment? Yes. So when I am reading, like, just for fun, I'm usually like on the couch or in bed or like in a comfy chair. When I read for the podcast, I am at my computer. I am sitting up with a desk in front of me because I am taking notes and I am highlighting the book. So 99% of the time, it doesn't always work out that way. Like if I get really busy with something going on. But when I am reading for Kingslingers, I am sitting up with a highlighter in my hand, because it helps me think better.
Yeah, I'd say probably a substantial fraction of mine is driving. So not universally, but driving is probably a good maybe majority. Anyway,
I gotta say, I wish I could do it. I wish I could retain all the information I feel like I need to retain, like you do, listening, because I just can't. For whatever reason, I just can't.
I think honestly a big part of it is the fact that I've been doing it for so long, and that I listen, for years before that was listening to podcasts a lot, and I just have literally developed the ability. Didn't necessarily have it before. Yeah.
Matt, Alex has a bonus question here.
Okay.
Here we go. You ready?
Yeah, hit me. Lord
of the Rings or Dark Tower? No elaborations, caveats, or persuading. Just answer.
I feel, okay, Lord of the Rings. I'm sorry.
All right. Dark Tower.
All right.
I'm not allowed to say why, so I won't.
That's fine. That's like going up to a priest and being like, Christianity or hats. Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if that metaphor really works for me.
They're just totally different things.
Yeah, but they're both books.
They are both books. That's true. They are both books. But they sit in different parts of my brain.
That's fair. But hats?
Okay.
Okay.
Look, kind of put me on the spot here.
I mean, I didn't ask you to try to develop a metaphor. There was no expectation of that. You did that on your own.
In fact, I was prohibited from coming up with a metaphor. And I tried anyway. And now here we are.
This is what happens. This is what happens when you don't listen to Alex.
Yeah, you tried to save me, Alex. And now I look like an idiot. I'm going to move on.
All right.
Baby Can You Dig Your Sam says, Since Scott is sitting in a Star Trek captain's chair in his doof pick, what is your favorite Star Trek series, Star Trek character, Star Trek movie? That question is for both of you.
Ooh, you want to go first?
I can go first, even though it was you sitting in the Star Trek chair.
Mm-hmm.
Character, probably Picard. Movie. I don't particularly like any of the TNG movies, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I mean, honest, like half joking answer, but like only half is Galaxy Quest, because I love that movie. That's like a genuinely great movie. It is not technically Star Trek, but it is clearly made from a place of love for Star Trek. The one where Spock dies, the Wrath of Khan, is probably just easily the best.
Fucking spoilers, man.
Oh,
Jesus
sorry.
Christ.
Well, dies anyway. The favorite series would be TNG. Yeah. Anyway, go on, Scott.
This isn't fair. Why did I let you go first?
I don't know.
When you took all my answers. Yeah, I grew up on the Next Generation, so like I went back and watched all of the original series, and I deeply love the original series. I think it's wonderful and weird in all the best possible ways. But TNG is always gonna have my heart. And to just simply to not say Jean-Luc Picard, I'm gonna say Riker.
Okay, Riker, interesting. My second choice would have been Data. So
yeah, that's a real mad answer.
Yeah.
My second choice would have been Beverly Crusher, because it's my first crush in life.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Beverly Crusher.
Makes
she was named because they knew
she was a crusher. Doing.
Yeah. The movie question is a really hard one, because I agree with you. Wrath of Khan is probably the best of the original series movies. None of the Next Generation films are particularly good, although like if I had to pick one, I guess it would be First Contact. I don't know.
That's a movie that I actually really liked a lot when I was like a kid, like after it came out, and then it just, as you rewatch it, you just, I think I just absorbed the criticism that it's like, this is just not.
It's not Star Trek.
It's not. These are not the same characters. This is not Star Trek. This is action movie.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I liked the reboot, the J.J. Abrams Star Trek. I liked it. I did not like the sequel, Into Darkness, and I did like Star Trek Beyond.
I kind of forgot those existed until you mentioned just now. But I still think Wrath of Khan is better than those. So
I think you're probably right. And those movies are also not really like what you think of when you think of Star Trek, but they are functional movies that are not bad.
Yeah, they're not bad. I agree.
You know what I have to do one day? I have not seen near enough of Deep Space Nine. Like that's like the one that everyone picks as like the best Star Trek, and I've only seen smatterings of Deep Space Nine. I've never like just watched it through.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen all of it. But I've watched a whole heck of a lot of it, and I do like it. So look, I think it's got some of the best storylines, like season spanning storylines. Maybe it wins out on like storylines, but I still think the TNG characters are better.
Yeah. Also, there was that one show that came out that I watched the first season of and really loved, and then just never watched more of it. Brave New World. You remember that one? Strange New Worlds. Strange New Worlds.
Yeah, I always say Brave New Worlds. Yeah, I'm in the same place. I think I watched the first episode of the next season, and it just didn't move me. And then for some reason, my brain interpreted that as this sucks, and I never watched another episode, which is weird because I really liked the first season.
Yeah, that's so weird how that happens.
Yeah.
And I watched one episode of Picard and said, "Why are you doing this?"
So I heard that like some later season of Picard was like really good.
Yeah, the final season it just turns into like TNG. Let's say goodbye to everyone that we love. Show, which like I want to watch that, but I don't know if I can get through to 2 seasons before that.
Maybe they can be skipped. We should look into this.
We should. I honestly, I just need to like force myself to watch. Like, how can I call myself a TNG fan if I don't at least squint and grimace through Star Trek Picard?
I don't know, man. I feel like we all know that it's a cynical ploy to exploit people like us. Exactly.
Yeah, no,
So
that's fair. That's fair.
yeah,
I also just can't get over how old Patrick Stewart is now. I mean, it's like obviously that's not his fault, but like when he sounds so tired. He sounds so old and tired. I'm like, you don't have to do this, Patrick. You're a knight.
yeah, I agree.
Don't.
Oh well.
All right, Bent Westward says, after the huge success of Kingslingers' inaugural meeting up in Bangor, where are we doing the second? For hosts' proximity's sake, I vote Colorado. We can even meet up at the Stanley Hotel. Okay, so we are not ready. We are not even close to ready to announcing anything related to a meetup. What I will say is we are working on it. Is that vague enough, Matt?
Yeah, I think that's the right level of
We
vagueness.
want to do it again. We're going to do it
Yeah.
again. We're not ready to say anything about anything.
Right. I think I'll refrain from elaborating because yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Cool.
Quick and easy. Done.
Yeah. So, be vaguely excited.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Row 2424 says, this is a question for Matt. As this podcast grows nearer to the clearing at the end of the path, do you plan on reading any other King novels? Also, does this mean King novels are on the table for the book club? Yes to both, I think.
At the risk of turning book club into the Stephen King book club, which we probably don't want to happen, I would say they're fair game. Yeah. With some exceptions.
Yeah. I think everything's got to kind of stay reasonable, but I'm totally not averse to that idea. And yeah, I have my list of probably a lot of the movies that I've watched that I liked. Like, for example, off the top of my head, Dr. Sleep. I'm like, I really want to read that book. I like that movie a lot, and I'm going to read that one regardless of whether it's on book club or whatever. So, and there's a few others that fit that bill. There's probably like at least 5 that I could that I just know I'm going to read, and then there's probably more beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah,
cool, great. That was well answered.
Thank you.
Well, good news, Matt. Up next, we have Pobo321, who says, I want to know what Matt's relationship with Stephen King will be going forward. Are there any of his books you want to read? Can you give us like one book you'll probably read on your own at some point?
Well, other than the one I just said, Dr. Sleep, I really want to read Pet Sematary, despite the fact that you've told me not to, and that it's going to ruin me. And I'm curious about Tommyknockers, even though everybody tells me not to read Tommyknockers too. It's funny. I feel attracted to the ones that people have told me not to read. This makes sense because my profession is the thing that my dad told me not to do, specifically. So I guess that's just my personality. I mean, I want to read Misery. I want to read, I think I want to read Under the Dome. I think I don't want to read The Mist, actually. I think I'm good on... Actually, no, I heard the ending is different, so maybe I could tolerate The Mist.
It is different, yeah.
I'm curious to read The Shawshank Redemption just for the contrast. Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. I am interested to see what happens next with Bill Hodges, so I can see, like, maybe I'll find that I don't love the next books the way other people are seeming to say, but maybe I'll just... So maybe I'll end up reading the next one, and then maybe kind of not beyond that, but... I'm literally scrolling through a list right now, but I think those are the ones that I had like earmarked for, like, definitely going to read this in the future. So far.
Cool. Matt, as you read this next question, if you can't tell, this is the phase of the mailbag Q&A where everyone was asking us about more Stephen King books that we're going to be covering.
Yeah, I'm picking that up. This makes a lot of sense. Mark Davo says, now that the podcast is almost at an end, if you guys, like Bill Hodges, were to return for one more case, i.e., Stephen King book, what would it be? And, in other words, is there any book that feels like the one that got away? Um, Gosh, not really. Like, I think, okay, so maybe you should have been the one to answer instead of me just opening my big mouth. But I feel like that's like the reason why we're stopping with the book we're stopping on, is that we did all the ones that we really, really wanted to talk about,
Hmm.
right? Like, if there were ones that got away, we would have just read those and covered them, right?
Yeah, I think so. With like maybe one or two exceptions. I think that's true. Like I I think From a Buick 8 is like a really really fascinating book, but it's a type of thing. So here's the problem. Whenever I start looking at a list and going down these things and thinking about this, is like I would love to have a conversation with you about From a Buick 8. I don't think that conversation would need to be 5 episodes long, 2 hours each. I think that would be a great hour-long conversation to have. And that's kind of how I feel about a lot of the stories that are left. Like, um, there are some exceptions to that. I mean, Under the Dome is another of his big like doorstop novels that I think would be fun to cover. I think my actual real answer to this would just be Under the Dome.
Hmm.
Because that's one that like just so happened to line up in the same decade as Doom McKee, and I like really, really, really wanted to read Doom McKee with you, and so I just picked that one. But Under the Dome is a book I really, really enjoy and has an ending that a lot of people don't like. So it would always have been fun to chat about those with you. And like, looking at this list, like these are all good books that would be fun to talk about, but not in a kind of like I specifically look at this book and says, yes, I have an idea on the shape of what this conversation will be before I get into it. Like that's the way I felt about every single book we've done so far.
Hmm.
And that's, yeah, as you said, part of the reason why we're ending where we are.
So yeah, great. You did give an actual answer, and the answer is Under the Dome. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
cool.
cool. All right, last question comes from Toastcat7594, who says, now that we are in the final stretch of Kingslingers, how are you both feeling about it? It's been a long journey that I love taking with the two of you, and a little sad it's wrapping up. Yeah, Matt, we got kind of an influx of comments like this on the Reddit and through email over the last couple days. I think people just like realizing that it's almost at the end, and I think the same is happening to us. I'm nervous about it. I'm nervous in that like it's scary ending something. It's always kind of scary ending something,
Yeah.
especially like leaving potential listeners behind as you end something is something I'm nervous about.
Hmm.
But it's like an excited nervous, because I think what we're doing next is has me really really excited. um
Hmm.
so I don't know, how are you feeling right now?
I mean, feeling about Kingslingers, so there's so many things I could say here, right? This is a huge question. This has been a huge part of our lives for years.
Hmm.
And it's been like half of our podcasting career, which is, we've been podcasting together for like almost like just shy of 10 years now, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's, so that's huge. But like, I think that's a good tenure. Like, that's a good length of time to focus on one project. And I feel like I've learned a lot, but I feel like the amount that I've learned has kind of dwindled over time, because it's like, okay, there's only so much you can really study one man's output before you kind of feel like you're kind of repeating yourself. and
Hmm.
and that's the last thing I want to happen with this show, is that we sort of go on autopilot and we start reading books where we're just repeating like, yep, and then this is this thing. And we're not even like, at that point we're not even doing justice to the material anymore, because um there's a certain chemical reaction that happens when you mix Matt Freeman, Scott Daly, and Stephen King, and you're kind of going to get the same result over and over, and then you're going to get bored of it, and then
Hmm.
and then and that's not something that any of us want. So I think this is a good, like, this is exactly the right time to be closing it up, and changing it up is really what I want to say, because we're not stopping podcasting. By the way, we also have another podcast called The Doofcast, which we release literally every week. So if there's like a fear that you're gonna not be able to listen to us talk about stuff, we have been doing that the entire time, and we'll continue to do that.
We have not plugged that other show near enough on this 250 episode 5-year project we've been doing.
It is. I wonder, like, I don't want to sound like an idiot here, but I'm like, people know that like, if you're sad that we're wrapping this up, just go listen to that. it's
and yeah, I think, to be clear, like we are about to moments from now announce what we're going to be working on next. So like, we're not just like stopping and walking away from the microphone too. And honestly, part of the reason why we selected what we're doing next to do it next was we thought it would make us happy, while also like being a good like transition thing for people that we're hoping to see that very specific Kingslingers thing. So I feel like we've done it. So yeah, I think every time I see those comments, what I want to say is like, we're not stopping. It's like we're not going anywhere. So yeah, I mean, I guess with that, are we ready?
Yeah.
You ready to talk about it?
Let's do it.
All right. So the big question has been for a while now, what are we going to do? So we're ending the show. What are we going to do next? And I just want to point out that if you are an eagle-eyed listener, you've known this for a long time. Probably like the worst kept secret of what we're doing, because I did this between seasons 2 and 3, where I rewarded people that actually check the spreadsheet regularly by just putting the entire season 3 schedule on the spreadsheet before we officially announced it. And I did it again with this show that we're doing next. Although I put 2 other shows on there too, just to like throw people off so they like, didn't know which one we were doing. Spoilers, we knew which of those 3 we were doing first the whole time. We knew a while ago, right? Like I think we decided on this like a while ago.
Yeah, I think we, if anything, it was more taking a while to decide on like the name.
Yeah, no, the name was the part that fell into place last. Yeah. All right. So to give a little background here, when we started this whole, like, I'm trying to bury the lead as much as possible to build suspense, Matt. I don't know.
I love it.
I need to say that to you, but when we started the We've Got Worm podcast, like, honestly, what I wanted to do, Matt, was like, I was watching a lot of, or listening to a lot of podcasts, like covering television episode by episode, and I was in love with that format. Like I was simultaneously listening to one that was doing The West Wing, Lost, Buffy, probably some other show I'm not thinking about, but I was listening to all these at the same time, and I was watching each episode of the show along with them, and I loved it. And I was just like, I can do that, and I want to do that, but Matt doesn't watch TV. So fuck. So we found Worm, which was a book that you had read, and I was like, oh, we can take that idea of an episode by episode TV podcast and just make it a book thing and only do it chapter by chapter. And that's what we did. And we've been doing that for 8 years now. But I've always kind of wanted to get back to like that central idea of like, I want to dive into and really talk about TV really deep. So when I was trying to figure out what we should do next, like the one thing that kept coming back to me was the Mike Flanagan television shows that I absolutely adore. The Haunting of Hill House, Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Fall of the House of Usher. These are some of my favorite television programs in like the past decade. Like I truly love them. And more importantly, I think they're things that are worth really diving into and talking about. So I guess with that said, Matt, what we're here to announce today is that our next project after Kingslingers is up, will be something we're calling Flanagan's Wake, a Mike Flanagan podcast. That name, folks, on top of being incredible, was incredibly difficult to come up with. We were stuck on the name for months and months and months. It's and then the second we saw it, like what we were waiting for was like the click.
Uh-huh.
Like the same thing happened with Kingslingers and all of our other names. It's like, oh, yep, that's it. That's the one.
Yeah.
Um, and we were waiting for it, and we finally got it with Flanagan's Wake, which is just macabre enough to perfectly fit Mike Flanagan. Like I honestly think he would find it funny,
Yeah.
but it also plays off of course, Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah. And us doing dumb puns for all of our names.
Yeah, exactly. So we're covering Mike Flanagan, but what does that mean? Obviously, we're going to watch every single movie. We're going to watch every single television show. We're going to do all those things. But I really struggle with this, Matt, because I he adapts so much in his work. Like so much of his work, especially his television shows, is adaptation. And I was like, we really can't talk about this stuff and talk about Mike Flanagan and really dive deep and analyze and inspect and like get to the bottom of why I love these Mike Flanagan shows so much without at least reading the things that he's adapting.
Yeah.
And so basically the show from that point on just kind of like created itself. It was like, oh, this is obvious. We cover everything, but if anything's an adaptation, before we do the adaptation, we read the book. And then like when you throw all that onto a spreadsheet, what it looks like is, for you Stephen King fans out there, yes, we will absolutely be reading Gerald's Game. We will be reading Gerald's Game in the exact same way we read books on Kingslingers. The same thing with Dr. Sleep, which is why I can't believe you answered that question with Dr. Sleep, Matt, knowing that you were gonna have to read Dr. Sleep in just a few short months.
That was a clever subterfuge. I forgot.
Wait, you forgot?
I forgot.
God damn it. So yeah, you can open the show schedule right now. It was in the Kingslinger schedule, and you can see what we're going to be covering. We're going to be reading Gerald's Game. We're going to be reading The Haunting of Hill House. We're going to be reading a bunch with The Turn of the Screw and a bunch of Henry James short stories. We're also going to be reading a bunch of Edgar Allan Poe. We also I'm considering, Matt, and I haven't fully decided on this yet. Flanagan did a show called The Midnight Club, which was based off of a Christopher Pike book, who is a like Goosebumps but for teens. And I haven't decided if we're going to actually spend some time with a Christopher Pike book or not. I'm leaning towards one episode on it right now, but I'm undecided.
Yeah, we'll see what the audience response is.
So yeah, I mean, it's Flanagan's Wake. We're going to be doing this for 87 episodes currently, so it's going to take a little bit of time. But I think, as we were talking about, I think this makes us happy because we're getting to do other stuff. We're getting to dive deep into a different creator, one that I absolutely love in Mike Flanagan, but a creator that I think is adjacent or at least parallel to Stephen King. So I think if you like Stephen King stories, you're probably going to like Mike Flanagan stories as well. So if you haven't seen these movies or TV shows, you can come along the ride with us. If you have, well, you can join us anyway. And the bonus is, we're still going to be covering some Stephen King books. We're going to be reading Gerald's Game. We're going to be reading Dr. Sleep and some other books as well. Some other great horror novels and short stories as well. So it excites me because I get to do new things and I get to do my TV thing. Like I'm really, really looking forward to watching The Haunting of Hill House again with a pen in hand to really dive into that show. But I'm also really looking forward to reading these books with you, Matt. So I just think it felt like an everybody wins situation.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I feel like everybody who's listening right now is there's something for them there. I hope that people join us for this adventure as well. It's going to be a little different too. So it's not just, the announcement is not just surprise. We were lying. We're actually still doing more. It's like, well, it's a hybrid. It's got some elements. It's got a lot of elements of what we've been doing for the last several years, but we're doing something different. We're doing something new. We're doing something we haven't done before, which is important for us to feel like we're growing and stretching ourselves and learning. And, it is important that it be a different artist, I think, a different creator because I don't know. I feel like I want to, this is part of my reason for doing this is I want to learn. I want to learn to understand how stories work. That's like the driving force for me. and I feel like there's a huge potential here. This is something I think we're both very excited about this. We're both like honestly looking forward to starting this.
Yeah.
Looking forward to talking about TV, something we haven't really done that much. Um,
Yeah, especially after how much fun we've had with Castle Rock these last couple months. It's made me even more excited to dive into this TV stuff. I think kind of what cemented me on, yes, this is the direction we should go, is when you finally watched Midnight Mass and
mhm.
and loved it as much as you did. And I was like, okay, this is right. This is right now. It's like that was basically my version of you making me read Arc 1 of Worm.
uh,
It's like if I was vibing with it at all, then it's a go.
uh-huh.
And if I wasn't, then we would have canceled the whole thing. And that's
Yeah.
it's kind of how it was here too. So I think this is important to say, right? That this is going to be a little bit different from Kingslingers in the ways that you just mentioned, but also some of this stuff you have already seen, right? You have seen Midnight Mass, you have seen the Doctor Sleep film, you have seen the Gerald's Game film. Um, I don't know if you've seen anything else. I don't know how much Shirley Jackson you've read, but
A little bit.
so this will be there will be situations where it will be just like Kingslingers, and that I will be the one who has read the thing before or seen the thing before, and it will be new to you. But there will be other situations where it's new to both of us. Like I have not read The Turn of the Screw, um, so we will be experiencing that one together for the first time. And then we've also both read a whole bunch of Edgar Allan Poe, so that will be us both geniuses on those episodes. So yeah, I mean, it's something new. It's something different. We will be covering the life of Chuck as well, the Stephen King short story. The movie is slated to come out, I think, later this year, and we're not going to get to that on the schedule till I don't want to say it, Matt. 2 years from today, literally.
Uh-huh.
Um, Mike Flanagan is also going to come out with an Exorcist movie probably before we get to that movie in the schedule. So we will probably end up covering his Exorcist film as well. And then, of course, there's that one thing looming over all of this, Matt, which is the Dark Tower. We know Mike Flanagan has the rights. We know he is currently working on a thing. We don't know where it's going to live. We don't know if it's actually going to happen. We don't know any of that stuff, but we do know that if it does happen, we were going to cover it one place or another. And so this feels perfect that our wrap up of Flanagan's Wake could also be like the Kingslingers crossover you've all been waiting for.
Yeah.
Where we get to cover the Dark Tower show, if that's what it ends up being. Don't even know.
Yeah, right. Obviously, that can't be certain one way or the other, but I'm very excited about that as a potentiality, and
Yeah.
I think this sets us up well to give everybody what they want if that is what ends up happening.
Yep. Yeah, so that is the big announcement. That's what we're doing next. We are tentatively planning on beginning that in January of next year. So I think Kingslingers is officially wrapping up the first week of November. And so we'll kind of take a couple months off there around the holiday to kind of build everything up. Maybe Matt, just maybe, this is unheard of for us, but like bank some episodes.
Yeah.
So we have some saved up already, and we're not constantly recording the night before the episode's supposed to come out. That's one of my goals for this new show as well, to get better at managing these projects.
That would be so weird, but yes, I agree. That would be a smart idea.
Yeah. So tons of announcements to come. We still are working on like the art, but stay tuned. Stay tuned. We are definitely going to be dropping the first episodes of that show in this feed. So if you're worried about like missing when it actually goes live, we will make sure you folks know about it. Don't worry. But we hope you guys are excited as we are. Some of these movies, Matt, I've never seen Ouija: Origin of Evil, although I hear it's supposed to be good. So I'm pretty excited about this thing, Matt. I really am. I think this is going to be so fun. It's gonna be another 2-year project for us that I think we're gonna have an absolute blast doing it. And of course, we get to watch some great movies and TV and talk with these wonderful people that are going to come along with us for the ride. So
Yeah, I'm so happy. I'm so excited.
and I just love our name. I really do love the name Flanagan's Wake. I love it so much.
Me too.
All right, so that is it. That's the announcement. That's what's happening next. But before that, we're not done yet, Matt. We're not even on to our last book yet, because next week's episode is going to be us taking a look at the television show Mr. Mercedes. The first season covers the first book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, so we will only be watching the first season of that show, and we'll be chatting about it on next week's episode. And then, and only then, do we move on to Fairy Tale, our final book in the Kingslingers saga. So it's all happening, but first we gotta see how Brendan Gleeson does on the old Bill Hodges.
Yeah, I mean, everybody loves Brendan Gleeson.
Yeah,
true. Is he the best Bill Hodges? Is the question.
Oh, we'll find out next week.
We will. Cool. All right. Remember, you can reach us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or over on Twitter at kingslingerspod. And of course, the subreddit at reddit.com/r/doofmedia is a great place to hang out. Of course, there's no discussion question this week, but perhaps you can go over there and tell us your thoughts about the announcement that we just made. That would be fun for everyone.
Yeah. The non-official discussion question is, what do you think of Flanagan's Wake, and which property in there are you most excited for us to cover?
There you go. Yeah.
Also, don't forget to go to our merch shop. That's doofmedia.myshopify.com. You will find Doof media stuff there. You will find Kingslinger stuff there, and perhaps one day some Flanagan's Wake stuff there as well.
Hope so.
That's definitely going to be. Just think of how many more stupid inside jokes we're going to make dumb merch out of.
Yeah.
On a show called Flanagan's Wake.
Everything that you own might have some incomprehensible catchphrase written on it someday.
That's our goal.
Yeah.
That's how we take over the world, actually.
Yep. If you like Kingslingers and if you're excited about Flanagan's Wake, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. There's also lots of awesome bonus content over there. Again, if you are one of these people who is bummed to see Kingslingers ending because you want to hear more Stephen King content, there's like a number. I'm not even going to say the number because it's a ridiculous number of episodes of us talking about Stephen King adaptations over on the Patreon feed. So go check that out.
Yes, please do. And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing this podcast. And I'm going to tell you, folks, we just did our big announcement on Flanagan's Wake. Like, here's the big thing in the next 4 to 5 months. Sharing this podcast is going to be key. Sharing that podcast is going to be key. We are going to need every single one of your help to make this happen. It's new shows need all the help they can get, and even old ending shows need all the help they can get. So please continue to do the good work that you've been doing in letting people know about us and sharing us on the socials and all other places. We appreciate that. And of course, the rating and reviews. We will bug you for reviews for Flanagan's Wake once there is something to review. But for now, please keep those reviews coming on Kingslingers. This week's Spotlight review comes from Michael, who says, "Ka happened." They give us 5 stars and say, "I first read the first 3 books of The Dark Tower in 1993. I've once read the entire series at least a dozen times, yet never have I known others who I could discuss it with. So when I came across this podcast, I totally geeked out and felt as though I'd found a home. I'm listening currently to them talk about wolves, and I love every single minute of this. I cannot push pause. Thank you so very much for this." Well, thank you, Michael. That was wonderful. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's very sweet. Thank you.
Can't push pause. He's going to be done before he knows it, and then he can go straight on to Flanagan's Wake.
That's right. The ride never ends.
Have you heard the Irish tune "Finnegan's Wake" that the James Joyce novel is based off of?
I don't know. Maybe not.
Irish folk tunes are hilarious, folks. Just so you know, I'm a quarter Irish, and so I get to claim to be Irish, even though I don't look Irish at all. But my dad used to play these songs for us all the time. That's part of why I loved Flanagan's Wake so much, is because my dad used to play the Clancy Brothers for me all the time, and they sang a version of the Finnegan's Wake folk tune, which is hilarious. It's like a big fight happens at a wake for a man named Finnegan, and then someone throws whiskey, and it lands on his head and revives him back from the dead because he got whiskey. Oh, that's delightful. I love the Irish.
It's incredible. I love that so much. Didn't know that.
But yeah, so that's a complete non sequitur, but That just shows you how freaking excited I am. So thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone who sends those rating reviews, and future thank you to everyone who continues to support us as we make this transition to a new show. It's we got 2 months left, and then we're off on the races. So please join us, and please come back next week for one final look at Brendan Gleeson no, he's not Mr. Mercedes. He's Mr. Hodges.
That's right.
Chasing Mr. Mercedes.
That's right.
All right, folks, we will see you for that episode next week. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.